Hi, my name's Juniper Muller. I go by they, them pronouns. I'm the current president of Melbourne Bisexual Network, and I'm so happy to be here once again to see Meg and have a big old chat about all things bi plus.
Hello, yeah, I'm Meg. I use she, her, they, them pronouns, and I'm also a fellow bisexual.
So good to have you, fellow bisexual comrade. Today we're talking about this idea. Often we talk about sexuality as who are you attracted to, or maybe like how much in the case of like asexual people or aspectrum people, but who you're attracted to. For us as bisexuals, it's like, oh, we're attracted to people of more than one gender. And that might include people of all genders or some specific genders. But I was curious to talk to you today about some sexualities being who you're attracted to, but also who you are not attracted to. And that's sometimes what we refer to as monosexual people. So, like straight people or gay people who identify as like monosexual, like men who are only attracted to men, say, or women who are only attracted to women, or straight people who are only attracted to the different gender from theirs. And sort of what that means to have an exclusive sexuality as compared to one that maybe it doesn't separate out so much.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's again another part that we often feel a bit more weird about talking about the things that we aren't interested in. And I would sort of personally describe myself as a person who can be attracted to any gender, but definitely go through periods of having preferences or even overall kind of having strong preferences at different, I don't know, just over time or even just generally. And I think for me, it's not something that's constant or fixed. It's definitely something which is a bit more in flux and has like flexibility in it. But I know for some people that's not the case. And I think it's really interesting talking about, like you say, what we're not interested in. And also on like a personal level and also sometimes a political level, because I think that can come into attraction too. There's sometimes maybe people we are attracted to but we don't want to be, or we're attracted to but we feel uncomfortable about, or and I think those things are also quite interesting and often not discussed because it might be uncomfortable or awkward or just not always quite sure how to talk about it as well. And I think particularly when we get into the complexities of gender and bodies, it again there's lots of interesting areas and grey areas as well, I think.
All these things are so much tied up in the gender binary, really, because for, let's say, a gay man to say, I'm only attracted to men, what is the limit at which man stops? Is it people who identify as men, people who look like a man, whatever that looks like? And so, of course, as always, we're also talking about gender and transgender and non-binary and gender expression and gender diversity too, when we're talking about, well, what does it mean to be only attracted to one gender as opposed to more than one?
Definitely, and also reciprocity as well. Like I think sometimes that's something we experience with bi people, is people saying they're not interested in us because we're bisexual, and so are we attracted to people's sexuality in and of itself as well? Because we talk often say maybe about queer people falling in love with people who are straight who maybe aren't interested in them, or those aspects too. Like who do we let ourselves be attracted to? Who do we feel attraction for, even if it's not reciprocated? And those complicated feelings as well. Say, having strong feelings for somebody, and then that you're just not the gender that they're interested in as well. So it's as always, complex and nuanced and not simple.
That's actually so interesting that you bring that up. I think it's a remarkable point because in pop culture, in stories, in media, there are so many stories, and of course out in the real life, in the real world as well, stories about us queers being attracted to someone who we guess might not actually be attracted to us. And because of the assumption of heterosexuality, the heteronorm, there is this kind of stereotype of the tortured queer, the tortured gay, who is like attracted to their straight best friend. But here's the thing: they might know that their best friend is attracted to a different gender, man who is attracted to women, say. But what if they're bi, right? And being attracted to the same gender doesn't mean that you were automatically not attracted to different genders. I was rewatching the cult classic, But I'm a Cheerleader, which is kind of it's about a woman going to a conversion camp, but it's a wonderful comedy of the time, highly recommend. But the whole point of the camp is to reinforce the gender binary and gender roles, to reinforce attraction to the different gender, but also to stop attraction to the same gender. And the question of bisexuality, of people just being attracted to more than one gender, is like just not suggested by any part of the film. It's as if bisexuals just don't exist.
And yeah, I have to say I am a bad queer in this context and have not seen the movie, but I have heard a lot about it, so I definitely want to get around to watching it. But yeah, that idea that we're not considered is not new to us, definitely. And also just the idea that we're trained in our attractions, in our roles. Like, so then you have to be retrained if you kind of lose track of what you're supposed to be doing, I think is fascinating, because I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about how much they're being programmed to certain things. And I think, yeah, therein lies that question in, say, having a crush on somebody, because I often think crushes, not always, but often they're sparked by something between people as well. They're not always an entirely one-sided thing, which I think sometimes we talk about it a bit more like that, oh, you have this crush on this inaccessible person, but well, why? Like, often there is something there, and I think often there are those elements of curiosity in people, and even if they're definitely not interested in ever exploring them, I think a lot of us have curiosities. And again, the dirty word of bi-curiosity, which I think again is a much maligned term, and people can be very upset about it, but I think I would say that most of us have curiosities about things. Whether we want to explore them, whether they're big parts of us, is another question. But we often have curiosities about things that we haven't done or things we haven't explored. So I think maybe some of our crushes are born out of something real, but maybe there's nowhere to ever go with them. But not to, I don't know, just always put it 100% on one person. Be like, oh, it's this crush that came out of nowhere. Because I think often there are things there, just maybe not things that will grow or things that you'd ever want to water, which is another thing, isn't it? Like, we don't want to water everything we ever think about, but it doesn't mean we don't think about it. And I think those parts are really interesting too, because I think so many cisgender heterosexual people have those feelings and have those thoughts. And I think that there's a lot of fear in it, or maybe just they just don't want to, they don't want to look at it, and that's absolutely fine. And I think how you identify and how you explore your world is entirely up to you. But it doesn't mean that those things don't exist. And I think sometimes we don't allow for that room to just think about things, even if we don't want to do them as well. So, yeah, I think it's interesting how many sparks this has gone off in my brain, actually, of this topic. Hey?
We're starting a wildfire here, Meg, a wildfire of ideas. Like, oh my God, there's so many things in what you just talked about that I want to respond to. I want to reclaim bi-curiosity, because curiosity is a wonderful thing, right? And I suppose no one wants to feel like they are a curiosity, right? That's we don't want to feel, or most of us, many of us don't want to feel fetishized, or like a zoo exhibit to be pointed at and sort of dehumanized in that way. But curiosity, that kind of openness to possibility, or desire to explore novelty, or to see what happens, to have that possibility of growth, I think is such a wonderful thing. when we do big scale studies and we ask huge populations, not just how do you identify, like if you use a label like straight or bisexual or whatever, but just about experiences, and especially internal experiences, like have you ever been turned on by someone of same gender, or have you ever had a crush on or been attracted to? We find that actually the amount of people who haven't had a same gender attraction is remarkably small. The people who just haven't had that at all in their life ever. Sometimes we have to talk about the relatively small number of people who identify as bisexual as being a product of straightness, and heterosexuality, actively rejecting that part of same gender attraction, which, if they were to be curious about it, to explore it, if there was more kind of safety and acceptance around it, then maybe we would have many, many more people identify as bisexual, or some variation on pansexual, polysexual, omnisexual, queer, whatever it might be. And only a relatively small number of people say, no, only attracted ever to people of a different gender of mine.
And it's so interesting, isn't it? Because you think all of the possibilities which exist, like it's very unlikely that most of us are entirely in these very strict boxes which we're encouraged to be in. But it makes sense that lots of us are in these boxes because there's severe complications, difficulties, and like dangers of not staying in those boxes as well. And it's also not a tool to criticize if you are, because I also think that's a wonderful thing if that's what fits and feels good, and also how lucky you are in some ways because there's this like a safety and a the world is far kinder if you do fit into the things that are expected of us. But I doubt that the majority of us do. So I think I'm often interested in that, and I think there's, like I said, that's some of my frustration with this talking about, oh, I'm a queer and I don't like the non-queers, or just in imagining that we're in very fixed groups and everybody else that's not in the group with us is somehow entirely different from us. Because my feeling about so many people is that these possibilities exist. It's just whether they get the chance or so many factors which go into whether you get to explore things, and a lot of privileges as well, definitely. And I think, but yeah, I think those possibilities and those curiosities exist in most people. And I think that's a really, really important and interesting thing to talk about for every human, not thinking that we're just in very distinct groups that generally, like, as always, there's more that we share than that we don't. And also that all these young folks who are very rejecting of labels and things, I think that speaks to that a bit more, if there's that extra bit of freedom and language and understanding that lots of people are kind of saying, I don't need to define myself, I want to just explore and be a person and see who I'm attracted to. And that gives me quite a lot of hope as well, that there is more of that, hopefully, just freedom in terms of personal exploration.
Me too, definitely feeling really good about the next generation coming up, and I think we can always look to younger people for hope, as well as looking to our histories of elders and ancestors who have kind of paved the way or expressed themselves in different ways. And we have to remember that these strict labels or strict definitions or lines in the sand weren't always there, certainly not in all cultures, some of them really recent, and that they're changeable. These lines in the sand are changeable. The idea, have you ever heard the phrase like batting for the other team, as if it's a war, like a war between the sexes? That what if we're all on the same team? Or what if it wasn't a competition?
Opposite. Hey, it's this thing that's in opposition to us. So I think that's still like quite an ingrained idea about sex and gender as well, like the opposite sex or the opposite gender, as though there are two, and it's entirely the opposite end of the scale, which I think is still kind of often the norm. for people to talk about things in that way. And there's always this part of you that's like, oh, but the possibilities are endless. How could there just be two things in opposition to one another? What about the rest of us that don't fit on this very specific scale? Or, I find, but like you said, the language is really interesting and how that reinforces different ways of thinking about those topics and ourselves.
There's actually like one of the queens of the bisexuals, Robin Oakes. I was hearing her talk at, I think, one of the Better Together conferences about her developing and evolving understanding of gender and sexuality. And she was saying that, I think it was maybe one of her workshop participants said to her, instead of saying attracted to same or opposite gender, talking about attraction to same or similar genders or different genders. And I've really embraced that, to talk about, say someone who is gay and might identify as same-sex attracted, talking about that as same or similar genders. And that can kind of encapsulate it with slightly softer lines around the box, or even describing straight people or heterosexual people as attracted to a different gender. That difference might not necessarily be opposite, because what does it mean to be opposite when perhaps we're thinking in 3 or 4 dimensional space rather than a line or like 2 boxes.
Sorry for interrupting, it's my enthusiasm spilling out again. But yeah, it's how much more room it gives everybody when we start speaking with that kind of language as well. But even the way that we view ourselves can be more expansive, and how wonderful that is for people who maybe haven't felt that room. They'll be like, what does that mean, and what does that allow me to think and to do and to be in different ways? I've been really lucky. My family have been here visiting from the UK after a very long period of trying to get here, and it's been so interesting talking to my parents about it. I'm really lucky. They're very open and thoughtful about how they interact with this, but it's lovely having those opportunities to talk about these things in person and to use this language with them and then answer questions, and that openness to finding new ways to talk about things which they've been talking about for decades, and thinking I can see that there's cogs whirring and them thinking about differently about how they can, again, like what room they give to other people to think, how so many words, not enough ways to put them well today. Lack of sleep, of having an 8-month-old baby, I'll put it down to that, and the chaos of life. But yeah, like I see just that excitement and curiosity, and also like discomfort definitely when we are challenged on some of the ways that we have thought about something. But it's wonderful, like the possibilities that open up. And I think and again, I hope that my child will be talking to me about these things in decades to come, and I'll be like, what? I don't understand this, and thinking about new ways of doing things again and again, because I think that's kind of the point, isn't it? But yeah, as always, I come back to like giving people more room and being more expansive. That has to be a good thing.
Like if that's sort of some of the practical, like day-to-day, like here's your life perspective, I think we also have so much to draw on from wonderful feminist thought and scholarship and queer theory scholarship and academia of people talking and thinking really deeply about these ideas, and that there is so much femphobia and misogyny in homophobia. And we talk about transmisogyny as being its own thing, different, or a subsection of transphobia, that when you see on Grindr, guys saying looking for straight acting men, or no femmes, like no fats, no femmes, and fat phobia is like a whole other huge kind of thing. But that kind of femphobia that is a part of homophobia, which of course both of those then become a part of biphobia, really kind of nasty, complicated ways.
Ableism and racism and all of the other awful is and the ways that we treat one another, and it's a really sticky, complicated mess, isn't it? And people, again, trying to find language to say what their preferences are, but often, again, being really hurtful and harmful in the process as well. And I think that's a complicated part, isn't it? How do we talk about who we're attracted to and who we're not? And again, like, how much of your attraction is programmed and political still? Even if you're queer, you're still programmed to find certain bodies and certain appearances more attractive. Doesn't mean that's what you actually do find attractive, but it's a safer way to go. And I think, again, the harm that does to people who don't fit those ideals is just horrifying, really, isn't it?
That idea of born this way and with a hard limit, and that's unchangeable, or that our desires are not political or not enculturated, is a sticky one. And I'm going to, put myself out there to say that a purely biological or purely nurture or nature thing is really limited and really kind of ignorant. That the reality is these things interact in quite complex ways. That we have only to look at what do billboard models look like, or what do famous celebrities or influencers look like, and how that has changed over generations. What body types or face shapes, how these things have kind of changed as to like what is the most desirable sort of thing. Desire is more like a seed that is planted, that various seeds are watered or treated differently and will grow differently, and you can have a degree of control over building attraction to certain bodies or genders. And this is not to say conversion therapy can be used or should be used to eradicate a certain desire. Not at all the case, and it's a awful horrible practice that is rightly outlawed. But also, when someone says, "Oh, like I'm, it's just my preference. I'm just not attracted to fat people," say, that's enculturated. That's because there is a history and a context in which that person exists. And it's the same a bit to do with gender and gender expression too, of like, are you used to, what has been your experience of attraction, or like what are the models who you've been able to see who, I don't know, like who look like me, right? Who were, raised and had a testosterone puberty and now have long hair and, a chest. What does that look like? Has it looked like humiliation and laughing at men in dresses on TV? Or has it looked like they've only, transgender people have only looked like sex workers, and the massive stigma that sex workers experience and discrimination? That has a bit to do with our desire and our attraction and how we choose partners and how we respond to those partners once we are in relationships with them.
Yeah, if things aren't held up and seen as glorious in the ways that they are, we don't know that. We're not programmed to see that beauty in the same way. And I think that we're starting to talk about that a lot more to do with race and ableism and fat phobia, and how these hugely impact how people are treated. And like, I think, like you said, gender and sex, they are definitely parts of that. And I think it's important, like you say, like we always say, it's important. We have ways that we are, and there's also the ways that we're programmed, and it's always going to be an interaction of those things. But if you live in an ableist, racist, heteronormative society, you're probably not exempt from being programmed with those things. You don't just get to be like, oh, I'm just not those things. Like, I just also don't have preferences in this other direction. You're like, okay, so how are you not impacted by all these things? Because we all are, like all lump it, like we are shaped by those things. There's a reason a lot of people don't come out till they're older, like particularly from, say, my generation. There's a reason I didn't talk about my queerness until I was an adult, and like it wasn't there. It was because I felt deeply that it shouldn't be there. And how we're appreciated, and again, like my privilege as a more androgynous but AFAB person, because that's seen as a sort of a preferable way to explore non-binary identities, I suppose. That's definitely celebrated in a way that a lot of other ways of exploring our gender physically are not. It's important to acknowledge that and say it's not coincidental that certain people find you attractive and certain people don't. And again, in a patriarchal society, embodying masculinity is always going to be seen as a good thing. And that's complicated too. How I feel about those aspects of my own identity are complicated the more I start to understand the way that society programmed me, and which parts of myself do I reject, which parts of myself do I celebrate. So again, it's that there's internal desires as well, aren't they? How we feel about ourselves and even separate from other people and other partners and other sexualities and sexes and genders.
You're absolutely right. It changes how we see ourselves and how we think of ourselves, how we look at ourselves in the mirror, how we choose to dress ourselves, how we feel about photos of ourselves and all of that. I saw a TikTok a little while ago of a woman who's saying, like, I'm a straight 3, like 3 out of 10 attractiveness meter. I'm a straight 3, but I'm a lesbian 9, right? And that is partially to do with how some of what is valued in bodies, in attractiveness, does vary in queer communities. And there is often a bit more space for bigger bodies or for like body modification, like piercings or colored hair or different haircuts or things like this. And also, all of the things that you just mentioned are still real. Like, at least say in queer Melbourne, we still see the people with the most Instagram followers are probably going to be white, thin, like still conventionally attractive in many ways. And for non-binary folks, probably AFAB. These things are complicated, and I think it's useful to be in conversation, in intra-community conversations, as well as intrapersonal conversations, like to have these conversations with ourselves, to think about what does it mean and what's changeable, what's something that maybe is less changeable that I need to work on accepting. How can I create space for people? How can I develop that curiosity that we talked about?
I'm finding it enormously just at the moment, and becoming a parent, and the way that society views those aspects, and which parts we sort of get taught to celebrate and which parts we get taught to put aside, or how you're supposed to perform those roles. And they exist in all aspects of society, doesn't it? The expectations of how you should do something, and what we think goes along with a title or an identity somehow. And it's I have so many thoughts today. They're just whirring around, which I didn't expect given when we began, but it's been like...
Well, it goes to show you, Meg, starting off somewhere and being curious about where we end up, sometimes creating that space to lead to great things. And I think we might wrap up in a moment, but I wanted to just express my gratitude to you for always being someone who I feel like I can talk really deeply with, and that I hope our discussions are useful for the folks who watch them as well. Such a pleasure, as always.
Such a pleasure to talk to you. I always love where we go and what tangents we go off on, and all of the thoughts that arise, and your generosity with how you share. Thank you.
Well, that's all we've got for today. Thank you so much to Vent TV. It's a pleasure, as always, being with you. I hope you have a happy and safe start to your 2022. Bye for now.
Bye for now.